Have you ever felt a perfect calm that scared you? That strange stillness when you're talking to someone who seems kind, but there's something you can't name that tightens your stomach from the inside. It's not what they say. It's what vibrates behind their words. Jung saw it. He studied it. He lived it. For decades, he observed a terrifying pattern in seemingly normal people, a silent signal invisible to the eyes, but recognized by the skin. A sign more lethal than a scream, more poisonous than a blow. It doesn't come with insults. It doesn't arrive with violence. It hides in politeness, in the smile that never reaches the eyes. It's the poison that has no smell. The worst part is our logical mind ignores it, but the body knows a primitive alarm that says something is broken here. The ancients knew it, but Jung was the one who decoded it with surgical precision. He called it by name, and once you understand it, you can't unsee it. There's only one sane option left. Walk away, cut ties, or you drown. It's the projection of the shadow, the most common virus in human relationships. Picture this. You're talking to someone, and suddenly they begin to see you as something you're not. They accuse you of intentions you never had. They attribute darkness to you that doesn't belong to you. You're not even there for that person. They're talking to their own reflection, distorted, vomited onto you. Sound familiar? The shadow is everything we deny in ourselves, what we're ashamed to accept. We hide it, we bury it, but it doesn't vanish. It builds up, it gains power. And when we don't face it, we throw it onto others like a shattered mirror. Jung discovered that those who constantly project their shadow onto others show the most dangerous trait a human being can have. The total inability to see themselves. That kind of person is blind. They don't see their own poison, so they see it in you. And the worst part is they believe it. The most dangerous thing of all is that from their eyes, you are truly the monster. They're not pretending. They're not acting. They're seeing you through the broken glass of their unconscious. And to them, that distorted reflection is you. There's no conscious lie. There's certainty. And certainty, when it's born from the shadow, is a lethal weapon. The oldest spiritual traditions knew it. They didn't use Jung's words, but they pointed to the same abyss. Buddhism speaks of the dark mirror that projects inner impurities as if they were external. Christianity screams it through metaphor. You see the speck in your brother's eye, but ignore the log in your own. The hell of projection is ancient, yet it still devours the innocent today. Those who project believe, and those who believe persuade. The person casting their shadow onto you isn't just trapped in their own lie. They can make others believe it too. And then you're no longer fighting one. You're battling a network of contaminated perceptions. The human brain filters reality. We already knew that. But when the shadow takes control, the filter becomes a mask. Everything gets distorted. Everything is justified. Robert Johnson said, it's like wearing glasses that warp everything you see, but you don't know you're wearing them. And there lies the real problem. How do you defend yourself from an invisible war? The only reliable signal appears when you feel that internal disconnection. When someone accuses you of intentions you don't recognize, when they point out emotions you never felt, and they do it with a certainty that cuts like glass, you're being attacked by something that isn't yours. You are the battlefield for an enemy who doesn't know they're fighting themselves. The shadow doesn't just use you as a mirror. It turns you into a target, and it does so with a calm that paralyzes. Hell, they say, is full of good intentions. Jung would say something worse. It's ruled by those who believe without the slightest hint of doubt that they are morally flawless, because there is nothing more dangerous than an ego inflated with virtue. When you see someone utterly convinced of their moral purity, their spiritual perfection, or their exclusive grip on absolute truth, you're not looking at a person. You're looking at a phenomenon. Jung called it psychic inflation. And it is, without a doubt, the most chilling symptom of all. This isn't ordinary arrogance. It's not social media vanity. It's something deeper, darker, more dissociated. Psychic inflation happens when someone merges with an archetypal image of the savior, the enlightened one, the bearer of truth. They no longer see themselves as fallible humans. They believe they are the embodiment of good, direct representatives of the absolute. That makes them dangerous because they have lost the mirror. Meister Eckhart warned centuries ago, the greatest obstacle on the spiritual path isn't the devil. It's believing you are God. Zen calls it the Zen sickness. The Sufis name it the veil of light, more lethal than the veil of darkness because it's more seductive and nearly impossible to detect. There's a brutal sign that gives it away. This person never questions themselves. They don't doubt their intentions. They don't even consider the possibility of being wrong because in their mind, they're not speaking from themselves. They're channeling a higher truth. While true sages kneel before mystery, the inflated one stands on it and uses it as a pulpit. The most perverse part is that this state creates magnetism. Jung saw it. Inflated leaders, blinded by their divine mission, attracted crowds starving for certainty because there's something in us that longs to surrender to someone who never trembles. Even if that person is lost, even if they don't know, it's no longer them speaking, but their shadow dressed in light. Claudio Nanho explained it with surgical precision. Spiritual ego is the hardest to recognize. A common ego screams, I'm important. The inflated ego whispers, I'm the voice of good. And that's why almost no one questions it. Do you know why so many people feel drawn to dangerous individuals who appear spiritually enlightened? Because the shadow knows how to disguise itself as light. Because the inflated ego doesn't need to shout. It only needs to shine. But if you want to spot one, don't listen to them when they speak. Watch them when they're contradicted. The reaction to criticism is the mirror. The inflated one doesn't process disagreement as something human. They experience it as a cosmic threat, a betrayal of good, an attack on the divine order they believe they represent. You don't see it, but inside their mind, you're not simply disagreeing. You're challenging truth. You're blaspheming, and that activates them. Jung warned that this state isn't just dangerous to others, but even more to the one experiencing it. When the small ego fuses with archetypal content like the savior or the righteous, the soul enters a tension so extreme that sooner or later it implodes. The higher the inflation, the more violent the collapse, because what's repressed always returns and it doesn't knock. But there's something even more disturbing. Jung saw it. People who seem perfect, always polite, always fair, always saying exactly what you want to hear. No mistakes, no contradictions, no shadow. That's where you need to run, because that's not authenticity. That's a mask. The persona, as Jung called it, borrowed from Greek theater, is the social role we play to survive. But when someone becomes confused with that role, when they forget it's a costume and believe it's their skin, there's no real person left behind. Only facade, only performance, and you feel it. And you feel, even if you can't explain it, your instinct knows. Fernando Pessoa said it with brutal clarity. The problem isn't wearing a mask. The danger is forgetting you have it on. Zen expressed it another way. They asked, what is your original face before you were born? That is your true identity. Not the one you built to fit in, but the one that burns underneath, waiting for you to stop acting. The Taoist sages said it with equal force. If you polish the surface too much, you destroy the substance. Jung simply translated that ancient wisdom into the language of the psyche because there's something alarming you feel before you understand it. When you talk to someone who does everything right, but something invisible doesn't sit right, that person who always knows what to say, how to look, what gesture to make, when to smile, everything is perfect, too perfect. And that far from inspiring trust sets off an alarm because what is truly human is not flawless. The human trembles, contradicts itself, doubts, loves, and hates at the same time. Social perfection isn't virtue, it's defense. James Hollis, one of the heirs of Jungian thought, made it clear. The more perfect the external adaptation, the emptier the inner life tends to be. And this isn't a metaphor. Neuroscience has confirmed it. We have mirror neurons designed to detect subtle incoherences between what someone says and what their body is actually communicating. When there's dissociation, we feel it. We can't explain it, but we feel it. A sense of distrust without any obvious cause. That's the symptom. But the illness goes much deeper. When someone puts all their energy into maintaining an image, the rejected aspects don't disappear. They get buried. They accumulate. And from below, they begin to grow. Jung called this the shadow. And the more rigid the mask, the persona, the more chaotic that shadow will be when it erupts, because it always erupts. Marie-Louise von France, Jung's direct collaborator, saw it hundreds of times. People who seemed flawless on the outside who one day collapse. Shadow eruptions, outbursts no one saw coming. Screaming, abuse, destruction. What was repressed for years demands a way out. And it doesn't knock. It breaks the door down. That's why those who seem most perfect are sometimes capable of unthinkable acts because they didn't betray others. They betrayed themselves, and that kind of betrayal has a price. It always collects in the body, in the mind, in relationships. As Jung said, to identify with the mask isn't adaptation, it's abandonment. Imagine you're talking to someone and suddenly without warning, something changes, not their voice, not their words. The air changes, their gaze shifts, the energy turns. You're no longer in front of a person. You're facing something else, something that comes from very far away and very deep. You don't know how to explain it, but you feel it as if something ancient had taken control. Jung called this archetypal possession, and it's no metaphor. It is one of the most alarming states one can witness in another human being. When an archetype, one of those primal structures from the collective unconscious, takes over, the person vanishes. What remains is a living mask, a channel, a vessel for forces greater than themselves. The ancients knew it. They called it possession. And they weren't entirely wrong. Anthropologist Mircea Eliade documented how shamans distinguish between conscious channeling and dangerous possession. In one, the soul dances with mystery. In the other, the soul is devoured by it. Christian mysticism spoke of discernment of spirits, the ability to tell the difference between what arrives with purpose and what comes to destroy. There are signs. There always are. When someone fuses with a fixed pattern, the perfect savior, the eternal warrior, the perpetual victim, the infallible judge, you're no longer in front of a complete human consciousness. You're facing a force, a fragment, an idea dressed in flesh, and you can feel it. There's a rigidity in their words, a strange glow in their eyes, a disturbing absence, as if their soul had shifted a few inches back. Robert Moore, Jungian analyst, said it bluntly. When you speak with someone possessed by an archetype, you're not having a dialogue with a person. You're confronting a myth, and myths don't listen. Myths don't change. Myths consume. Modern neuropsychology confirmed the unthinkable. In certain altered states, the regions of the brain linked to personal identity shut down. while others related to transpersonal experiences light up like fire. In sacred rituals, that can be medicine. But in daily life without containment, that can become an abyss. The most chilling part of an archetypal possession is that it doesn't feel like a possession. The person doesn't feel trapped. They feel enlightened, full, at peace. Doubt vanishes. Ambiguity disappears. Only an indestructible certainty remains. And that certainty is magnetic. Jung saw it. Leaders caught in archetypes who pulled entire crowds, not with ideas, but with supernatural conviction. But the danger lies at the core because archetypes are neither good nor bad. They are extremes. The savior archetype also holds the fanatic. The warrior leads to the martyr. The judge hides the punisher. When someone fully identifies with one, sooner or later its dark side will surface and they won't even realize it. Jung document brutal cases, people possessed by an ideal image who ended up acting in ways that directly opposed their conscious values. Violence, manipulation, abandonment, all justified, all rationalized, because in that state there is no reflection. And without reflection, there is no humanity. But there is something even more sinister, a pattern that repeats like an echo. Jung called it the repetition compulsion. It's when someone, without knowing it, recreates the same wounds, the same stories, the same abysses, as if a part of their soul were trapped in an invisible loop. And you can see it, you can feel it, and you know you're not witnessing a life. You're witnessing a tragedy. It's not malice. It's not a conscious decision. It's a deep, automatic, ancestral force. The person doesn't choose to repeat. They're simply obeying a script written long before they could read. Christopher Bollas described it with brutal precision. They are unthought known, experiences so early or traumatic that they were never processed. Yet they govern everything that followed. Spiritual traditions knew this. They called it karma. They called it a family curse. They called it shadow. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that when you see it clearly in someone else, you understand something essential. You're being pulled into a drama that isn't yours. And if you don't cut it off, it will consume you. Karma, in its original Buddhist meaning, didn't speak of punishment or reward. It spoke of patterns, of cycles, of automatic impulses that drag us into repetition over and over again. In Judeo-Christian tradition, original sin can be read as an inherited unconscious wound, something you didn't choose but still directs you, a script written without your permission. The sign appears when you see someone who, without knowing how, always falls into the same kind of pain. Different faces, same drama, another stage, but the script is identical. In the most disturbing part, they live it with surprise, as if fate hated them, as if they were perpetual victims of some external force, when in truth, they are recreating their own hell without realizing it. Neuroscience has already confirmed it. Trauma forms pathways, imprints in the brain, roots of least resistance, and what wasn't processed becomes a map. Your mind, without warning you, seeks to confirm what it already knows, even if it destroys you. There's no conspiracy. There's repetition. But there is something even more dangerous. People trapped in unconscious repetition compulsions don't suffer alone. Without realizing it, they drag others in. They assign you roles. They project parts onto you in a play that began long before you arrived. Donald Kalshit said it with brutal precision. Unresolved trauma doesn't want to be healed. It wants to be acted out on stage through you. And so, without noticing, you might be living out a role that isn't yours. And the worst part, it feels real. It feels like fate. Jung saw this phenomenon and called it tragic synchronicity. The more unconscious the pattern, the more strange coincidences appear. Everything seems to conspire, but it's not the universe. It's your shadow setting the stage. Jungian analysts recognize it instantly. People who tell the same story again and again, always betrayed, always abandoned, always misunderstood, always the victim, but they don't see the pattern. And as Marie-Louise von France said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The most disturbing part of repetition compulsion is that it has magnetism. It doesn't just pull, it seduces. The person caught in those patterns emits invisible signals, and those signals attract like magnets exactly the people who will help them reenact their original wound. Jung called it negative synchronicity, a phenomenon where the unconscious silently orchestrates the same hell over and over again. But if this reveals the core of the danger, it also reveals the exit. Because Jung didn't stop at the abyss, he also pointed to the path of transformation, the conscious integration of the mirror. And that changes everything. That is the radical difference between someone who is psychologically dangerous and someone who has begun walking toward wholeness. You don't need to be a psychologist to notice it. You feel it, because when you're with someone who is integrated, something inside you lowers its guard. Not because that person is light or good, but because they're not acting, they're not projecting, they don't need to pretend. Integration is not perfection. It is honesty. It's looking at your shadow and saying, this too is me. As Jung said, I'd rather be whole than good. And that phrase, so often misunderstood, draws the line between true integrity and a shining mask filled with inner cracks. Spiritual traditions have spoken of this all along. Tibetan Buddhism called it turning poison into medicine, using even the darkest emotions to grow. Western alchemy represented it with gold, not the metal, but consciousness. The transformation of what was rejected into power, into truth, into soul. And when you meet someone who has begun that process, you don't forget it. There's something in their eyes, a rare mix of brutal honesty and genuine compassion. They don't deny their impulses. They don't glorify themselves for admitting them. They simply observe them and carry them as part of the cost of being awake. Science is finally catching up. Neurophysiology has shown that this integration leaves visible traces, neural connections that don't just activate to avoid error, but to sustain awareness when error arrives. Integration is not magic. It is embodied biology. Researchers like Daniel Siegel have demonstrated that by reuniting previously dissociated parts of experience, we literally create new neural pathways. The brain changes. The primitive regions of emotion become linked to areas of deep reflection. And that's where the real work begins, to stop being reaction and become presence. The most transformative truth is this: the more aware we are of our shadow, the less power it has over us. As Robert Johnson said, what we deny does not disappear. It simply takes other forms, more hidden, more dangerous. Integration channels that raw energy and turns it into creation, into clarity, into responsibility. The person who has begun this inner work is easy to recognize. Their gaze is different. They see the world in shades. They don't split it into black and white. They don't label others as good or bad. They understand we all carry contradictions, that no one is entirely innocent nor entirely guilty, and that awareness is freedom. James Hollis was clear. Maturity begins when we stop believing in our absolute innocence. That's why true masters never present themselves as perfect. The Dalai Lama admits his anger. Teresa of Avila spoke of her crisis. Rumi wrote of his inner chaos through sacred poetry. Radical honesty is the real power, and that power never shouts. It doesn't impose. It doesn't need to declare itself. And this is why true honesty, truth is feared in today's time. I'm sure you've noticed. Everyone talks around the issues, but not what the root cause. Someone who has integrated their shadow doesn't need to seem wise. They are. Because they no longer run. Because they no longer perform. Because they no longer project. As Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said, in the beginner's mind, there are infinite possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. So now I ask you, did you recognize any of these signs in someone close to you? Or worse, in yourself? Write in the comments. I don't carry other people's shadows. Let it be written. Let it be your line in the sand. Share this message with someone who needs to break their unconscious pattern. Subscribe. Turn on the bell. And remember,